Step out into your garden on a warm summer morning, and there it is. A faint dusting of white, almost as though someone brushed a little flour across the broad leaves of your squash. You reach out to rub it away, but it doesn't come off. By that same afternoon, it has crept onto the cucumber vines growing right beside them. And within a week, those big green leaves have turned pale, brittle, and curled at the edges, while the young fruit beneath them has simply stopped growing. That white dust is powdery mildew, one of the most common and most disheartening problems a vegetable gardener will ever meet. Most folks either reach straight for a chemical fungicide or, sadly, give up on the plant and pull it out of the ground. But the most effective remedy for that stubborn white powder may already be sitting in the door of your refrigerator right now. And here is the strangest part of all. Nearly everyone who owns it has been using it in completely the wrong way. The flip plus the science. For about 25 years now, a tip has been passed quietly from one gardener to the next. Pour a little milk on the soil around your plants, the advice goes, and give them a healthy calcium boost. And it feels sensible, doesn't it? Milk built strong bones in us when we were young, so surely it builds strong, sturdy plants too. But that well-meaning advice takes a genuinely useful ingredient and sets it down in entirely the wrong place. The real power of milk in the garden is not in the soil at all. It is up on the leaves, and the reason why is one of the most quietly elegant little bits of science you will come across all season long. Back in 1999, a Brazilian plant researcher named Wagner Bettiol sprayed the leaves of zucchini plants, a close cousin of your cucumbers and your summer squash, with nothing more than ordinary cow's milk simply diluted in plain water. He did not do it just once. He repeated it across a careful series of greenhouse trials, and the numbers held up again and again. A spray of just 10% milk, that is 1 part milk stirred into 9 parts water, applied twice a week, held back powdery mildew about as well as the synthetic fungicides farmers were paying good money for. At stronger strengths, a single weekly spray cut the severity of the disease by roughly 85 to 90%. So how on earth does a plain glass of milk manage that? Here is the part that surprised even the scientists. When milk dries on a sunlit leaf, the proteins inside it react with the light to create tiny bursts of what researchers call free radicals, the very same kind of reactive oxygen our own immune systems produce. Studying milk on grapevines, researchers actually watched those bursts collapse the fungus's fine threads and rupture its spores within a single day. And here is the elegant part. Your leaf is protected from all of it by its own waxy coat, so the harm falls only on the fungus, and never on your plant. That is exactly why you spray in the morning light. The sun is not incidental here. The sun is the trigger, and what makes it especially clever is how particular it is. Researchers held milk up against plain hydrogen peroxide, another common source of those same free radicals. The peroxide could collapse the fungal threads well enough, but it left the spores unharmed and even seemed to coax them into sprouting. Milk did both jobs at once. It collapsed the threads and ruptured the spores. One of milk's proteins in particular, called lactoferrin, appears to puncture those spores directly. So milk is no blunt, clumsy tool. It is closer to a key cut to fit one very specific lock. And there is a second, gentler effect working right alongside the first. As it dries, milk leaves the surface of the leaf a touch more alkaline than the fungus likes. Rather the way a thin dusting of baking soda would, only without any harsh salt building up over time. Between the two of them, that burst of free radicals in the sun, and the quiet shift in the leaf's own surface, the mildew spores find themselves in a place that simply no longer welcomes them. Know your enemy. Why mildew is a strange fungus now to use this gift well. It truly helps to understand the troublemaker you are dealing with. Because powdery mildew is a strange one indeed. Most garden fungi need water sitting on a wet leaf before they can take hold, which is exactly why we are so often warned to keep our foliage dry. Powdery mildew breaks that rule entirely. It does not need a single drop of water on the leaf to infect your plant. In fact, it positively thrives on warm, dry days paired with cool, humid nights. The nights coaxing out its spores, the dry days carrying them off on the breeze. It spreads fastest precisely when the weather feels most pleasant, and that is just why it blindsides so many good gardeners, and it moves with a speed that can take your breath away. Left unchecked, powdery mildew can spread from 1/10 of a plant's leaves to nearly 3/4 of them in a single week. Nor is it merely an eyesore. As it blankets a leaf, it quietly steals the very sugars the plant manufactures in the sun, draining away the energy your plant needs to swell and ripen its fruit. So here is a common mistake worth catching right now: waiting until the white patches are everywhere before you lift a finger. By then you are far, far behind. Milk is a guardian, not an eraser. Its real strength lies in starting early, before the trouble ever has a chance to settle in. 2 more things are worth tucking away. First, a reassuring one. Each kind of powdery mildew is remarkably fussy about its host. The mildew you might see dusting an oak tree or a lilac bush simply cannot leap over onto your zucchini. They are entirely different fungi with entirely different tastes, so you needn't fear that one spotted leaf dooms the whole yard. And second, a quiet invitation you can easily avoid: a heavy dose of nitrogen fertilizer late in the season. All that soft, lush new growth is exactly what the fungus loves best, so go easy on the feeding once high summer arrives. Milk is a multi-tool. It's many jobs now. Most people who know this milk trick at all assume powdery mildew is the whole of the story. It is not. That same humble glass of milk turns out to be a genuine multi-tool out in the garden, with several honest jobs to its name. But before we leave powdery mildew behind, one practical word, because it is just where most people stumble. That morning milk spray does its finest work as a steady habit, not a single heroic dose. The common mistake is to spray once, watch the white fade, and then stop, only to find it has crept right back a week later. So treat it more like brushing your teeth than like putting out a fire. A light misting every week, kept up faithfully through the warm months, is what keeps a plant truly clean. Keep those big leaves green and working, after all, and your plant holds on to every bit of the energy it needs to pour into its fruit. Take gray mold, for instance, that fuzzy, grayish rot the scientists call botrytis, the one that turns ripening tomatoes and soft berries to mush almost overnight. That very same milk protein, lactoferrin, has been shown to rupture the spores of gray mold too, stopping them before they ever spread. And for the rose growers among you, a 10% milk spray has been found to help hold back black spot and rust as well. But let me give you a fair and honest word here. On roses, milk helps keep those troubles in check. It will not cure a bush that is already badly stricken. Think steady management, not a one-time rescue. With gray mold, the very same rule holds true. A preventive mist, applied when the weather turns damp and the planting starts to feel crowded, does far more good than any spray reached for after the fuzz has already set in. Then comes milk's most forgotten job of all, the one that very nearly vanished from gardening memory altogether. Going all the way back to the 1940s and 1950s, researchers discovered that milk can slow the spread of a whole family of plant diseases the scientists call mosaic viruses. You may well have met one without ever knowing its name. The leaves blotched in mottled light and dark green like a patch of camouflage. The growth gone stunted and sad. The fruit coming out streaked and oddly misshapen. Tomatoes catch tobacco mosaic. Cucumbers and squash catch something called cucumber mosaic virus. And here is a hard truth no spray on this earth can change. Once a plant carries a virus, there is simply no cure for it. Not milk, not chemicals, not anything at all. But the spreading of it, now that is another matter entirely. These viruses ride from one plant to the next, on your own fingers and on the blades of your pruners. In field trials with tomatoes and peppers back in the 1950s, researchers found that something as simple as dipping your fingers in milk before handling the plants dropped the rate of infection dramatically. In the peppers, it fell from more than half of all the plants down to very nearly none. In the tomatoes, it dropped from 90% down to 15%. So a gardener facing a virus has 2 simple tricks to lean on. Dip your shears in milk as you work your way down the row, and give your young transplants a milk dip or a gentle misting before you ever set them out into the bed. And unlike a harsh bleach, milk will never corrode the good steel of your tools. There is even a reason the milk works where you might least expect it to. The aphids that carry these mosaic viruses pick them up and pass them along in mere seconds, probing one leaf and then darting to the next, far too quick for most sprays to ever catch them in the act. But a dried film of milk seems to foul that lightning-fast probe, making it harder for the insect to draw the virus up or to deliver it into the next plant. It is a physical trick, you see, not a poison at all. Now let me be completely straight with you here, because your trust matters far more to me than any tidy little headline ever could. Milk will not cure a virus once it has taken hold, and it will not stop every last aphid that carries one. What it will do is slow the spread through touch, and in a busy summer garden, where you move from plant to plant, pinching, tying, and harvesting, that one simple thing can be the difference between losing a single plant and watching a sickness move straight through your whole row. And if you ever wonder how such a cheap and useful trick slipped clean out of common knowledge, the answer is plain old economics. There is no patent to be had on a glass of milk, and no company can build a thriving business selling you something you already carry home from the store each week. So the big trials went unfunded. The advertisements were never run, and a genuinely good tool simply, quietly fell out of the gardener's kit. Follow the money, as the old saying goes, and the mystery solves itself. And there is one last job to milk's name, which happens to be the only honest way that mixing milk with something else actually earns its keep. Because the proteins in milk are just slightly tacky, a small splash of it, stirred into another leaf treatment, helps that treatment cling to the foliage and resist being washed away by the next good rain. The old-timers used milk in exactly this way, long before any commercial sticker ever sat on a garden shelf. Now, before we move along to the part that nearly everyone gets backwards, and that is the soil, I would like to hand you something to make all of this a great deal easier. Putting these methods to work goes so much more smoothly when the exact numbers are sitting right there in front of you. So I have put together a free printable guide, I like to call it the blueprint, laying out every one of these milk recipes, the dilution rates, the timing across the whole growing season, which plants respond best of all, and the safety notes, every last bit of it on a single sheet you can tape right up inside the garden shed. If you would like a copy of your very own, just look for the QR code appearing on your screen right now. Open up the camera on your phone, hold it steady toward the code for just a second, and it will carry you straight over to the download. There is no sign-up and no fuss of any kind. Think of it simply as a small thank you for spending a little of your day out here in the garden with me. Go ahead and grab it now, and then I will walk you gently through that great big soil myth. The myths, what milk does not do all right. Now that you know what milk genuinely does, let me clear away the things it most certainly does not do, because the internet has fairly buried this humble liquid under a whole mountain of nonsense. First, the big one. Milk is simply not a fertilizer for your soil. The whole notion took off around the year 2000, when a dairy farmer began spreading his leftover surplus milk out across his fields. And ever since, study after study has arrived at the very same plain conclusion. Milk adds very little of any real value to the soil, and it has no meaningful effect on how your plants actually grow. As one seasoned garden writer put it about as plainly as a person can, a single handful of compost would do as much for your soil as a whole gallon of milk, and that compost costs you nothing at all. Worse still, pour milk onto the ground in any real quantity and those solids will sour and turn sharp, draw whole clouds of fungus, gnats, and flies, and grow a film of mold besides. You will not be feeding your garden, you will only be feeding a smell. Second, the calcium myth. Watering with milk does not load your plants up with calcium. Here is a thought that turns the whole idea clean on its head. Calcium does not come from a cow. It is a mineral, it comes up out of the ground. And this matters most of all with blossom end rot, that sunken, leathery brown patch that ruins the bottom of a tomato or a squash. For years and years, gardeners have been told it is a calcium shortage and told to pour on milk to set it right. But blossom end rot is almost never a shortage of calcium in your soil. It is a delivery problem. Calcium rides up through the plant on the very stream of water it draws from its roots, and when your watering swings from bone dry one week to soaking the next, that stream falters and the tip of the fruit starves, even while the soil all around it holds calcium to spare. So the real fix is not more milk. It is even, consistent watering and a good thick blanket of mulch. Third, a myth you have very likely heard whispered, that milk kills aphids because the poor little insects simply cannot digest it. It is a charming story, and there is no real science behind it at all. If aphids are your trouble, the proven tool is a plain insecticidal soap, which works by direct contact with the pest. Milk's only honest role with aphids, as you just saw, is that a thin film of it makes a leaf a touch less inviting to them in the first place. And finally, those so-called miracle tonic recipes that blend milk together with molasses, with Epsom salt, with ammonia, even with beer. Pouring a dozen ingredients into a single jar does not work some kind of magic. Molasses delivers no meaningful iron to your plants. Epsom salt only helps in that rare case of a genuine magnesium shortage. Use it when there isn't one, and you can actually knock your soil right out of balance. So here is the last mistake to leave behind for good. Stop hunting for a single magic jar that does it all. No such jar has ever existed. How to use it right. The recipe, so let me gather all of it up now into one simple recipe you can mix this very evening. Pour 1 part skim milk into 9 parts water. For a common handheld spray bottle, that works out to roughly 1 cup of skim milk stirred into 9 cups of water. And do use skim, not whole milk, for a reason well worth knowing. The proteins that do all the real work stay right there in the skim. It is only the fat you are leaving behind, and with it, that sour, rancid smell. Give it a gentle stir, pour it into a clean bottle, and you are ready to go. Spray in the early morning, on a dry, sunny day whenever you can manage it. For remember, that sunlight is the very thing that switches the milk on. Coat both the tops and the undersides of the leaves with a fine, even mist, until they are just lightly damp, never dripping wet. Repeat it once a week to keep trouble away, or step up to twice a week if powdery mildew has already made its first appearance. And do start early in the season, before you ever spot a single white fleck. A habit begun in June will serve you far better than a frantic scramble come August. This works beautifully right across the cucurbit family. Your cucumbers, your zucchini, your summer and winter squash, your melons and pumpkins, and just as well on tomatoes, on peppers, and on roses too. Now a few plain safety notes, because careful hands are simply part of being a good gardener. Keep the spray dilute, and keep it up on the leaves. Never drench the soil with it, for all the good reasons you now understand. Don't be tempted to mix it stronger than about 3 parts in 10. Either too heavy a coating can. On a few sensitive plants, invite a little leaf spotting of its very own. Give your plants good elbow room and open air while you're at it, since crowding and stagnant shade are a mildew's 2 best friends. And if you are spraying vegetables you mean to eat, simply give them a good rinse before they ever reach the table. And here is a real comfort worth mentioning. A dilute milk mist is about as gentle as a garden spray ever gets, kind to the bees working your blossoms, harmless to your pets, and safe even on the very day you harvest, so long as you give your pickings that quick rinse. And that is all there is to it. A few pennies, a spray bottle, and a few quiet minutes out in the cool morning air. Here is the one thought I would like to leave resting gently in your hands today. The finest gardeners I have ever had the privilege to know were never the ones who had memorized the most clever tricks. They were the ones humble enough to question the tricks they had always believed, and wise enough to put each one back in its proper place. A glass of milk works no wonders down in your soil, but used thoughtfully, up on the leaves and in the morning sun, it is a small and honest piece of garden wisdom well worth the keeping. And there is a quiet joy to be found in that, I think, in growing just a little wiser ourselves, right alongside the gardens we tend, one gentle season at a time. If a simple milk spray has ever rescued a plant in your own garden, or if you are heading out to try it for the very first time, I would truly love to hear your story down in the comments below. There is a whole community of thoughtful, generous gardeners gathered there, trading what really works in their own backyards, and if honest, science-backed gardening that respects both your time and your good common sense is the sort of thing you are after. Do consider subscribing so that the next bit of garden wisdom finds its way right to you. Until then, Keep your hands in the good earth and your mind open to a better way.